When Jesus was a boy, by the time you were 15, you were expected to have the Pentateuch memorized. The first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. You were supposed to have those memorized. When Jesus was a boy, at least in the prayers twice a day, you prayed this prayer: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might." That was the prayer that you were to pray. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. The elders have selected our theme for the year. It is one. One is an interesting word, an interesting idea. One. They particularly had the concept of one kingdom, one heart, and one faith involved. They used Romans 15:5 and 6 as sort of the jumping off point. I sort of made this statement here to give me some guiding chapters throughout the year. So throughout the year, in 2023, we will pursue one kingdom with one heart through one faith. And we'll have a chapter on one kingdom and a chapter on one heart and a chapter on one faith, and we'll unfold those things. But I thought it important as we begin that we start with the Shema. The Shema is that Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 passage. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one." Now, they don't put the verbs in the Hebrew. They put 2 nouns together, and you have to supply a verb, at least in this section. And so versions have a little variation on how the Shema is translated. But Shema is not a strange word. Shema is the first word, hear. That's all Shema means, hear. But hear is much more than, did you hear what I said? Could you understand the information? This word in Hebrew, hear, Shema, is to intelligently understand, to process and apply that message. Basically, in Hebrew, to hear is to obey. There is no tension between those. If you heard the voice of God, you obeyed. And Shema includes hear. I want you to hear, O Israel, the people of God, the chosen people of God. And I want you to think of it in that phrasing this morning, not as a Jewish nation, not as an Israelite far away, but as the chosen people of God, and you are the true Israel today. So hear, O Israel. Take it deep within you. The simple message, the simple focus, the simple thought that drives who you are. For 1,400 years before Jesus was a boy, they had been saying the Shema. 1,400 years. We struggle to have 400 years in our nation. For 1,000 more years than we've even been a nation, before Jesus was a boy, they had been saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Praying that twice a day, learning that as the catalyst for their life. And we don't need to take that lightly. I know that was Old Testament stuff, or we're not Israelites, we're Gentiles. No, I want you to forget all of those things and realize that God gave guiding principles. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was saying that. After 1,400 years before that, it had been being said. So 3,400 years ago, people started saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." 3,400 years ago, people started with a phrase in their prayers. Well, it's easy for prayer phrases to become mantras, to become something of an amulet, to be something of just a rote ritual word. God never intended for that to happen. This is a guiding concept. Hear and listen and understand and obey, Israel, the chosen people of God. Yahweh is our God. Yahweh is our God. I'm a little reticent to use the word Yahweh. All the RSV, the Old American Standards, had Jehovah there. The Lord works, but the Lord becomes a little ambiguous for us. And there's pros and cons to using a name, Yahweh, or to use a designation, the Lord. If I use the Lord, then it might be a little bit vague. There might be some possibility that there could be lots of lords, or someone else may struggle to be in charge, or someone else might claim to have some position. And so for a while this morning, I want you to be sure and hear this. It is the word Yahweh, as well as we can say it in English. Yahweh is our God. I want you to know his name because he gives you that name. He's going to give it to Israel in our text this morning. I want you to understand that Yahweh makes himself available to them, vulnerable to them. To have someone's name was to have access to that person, to that being. Yahweh is our God. We know who our God is. He's not some vague divinity far away. He is Yahweh. He is our God. He has chosen us among all the peoples on the face of the earth, Israel would hear. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, Moses is reminding the people to hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God. Now hear that 3,400 years ago, when a whole lot of people were claiming to be God. And Baal's claiming to be God, and Asherah's claiming to be God. Molech is claiming to be God. We've got all sorts of gods all around, and we're about to enter into this new land that we're going to conquer and take. And Moses says, I want you to understand that Yahweh is our God. None of these other folks, none of these other people are our God. Yahweh is our God. I don't want you to be confused by someone saying, well, it's just another religion. They have religion too. And so the religion of the Canaanites, it's okay to sort of marry in and buy in and accept in. He says, no, before you go in, I want you to know Yahweh is our God. Yahweh is our God. Don't miss it. Yahweh is one. Yahweh is one God. That's how Jesus says it in Mark that was read earlier. Eli did a good job reading. That's how Mark says it. Jesus quotes the Septuagint. If there's a little difference between what you hear in Deuteronomy from Moses and from Jesus in Mark, it is because Jesus quotes the popular version of his day. That's pretty cool, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure he knows Hebrew. I'm sure he knows what God said to Moses. I'm sure he knows what Moses heard, but he quotes the scripture everybody at church had. He uses their Bible. And he gives them that quote. And they come to him and they say, which is the greatest commandment? And he says, oh, you know the greatest commandment. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That's it. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. He adds strength in that listing there from the Septuagint. That's the message that Jesus has. We want to know what's the most important one. And all Jesus goes back, he says, oh, we learned this when I was 6. We learned this on Kids Song Sunday. We sang a song as the kids went out, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Don't you think they sang the Shema? Just like you sang the Shema? They were memorizing and they were singing and they had kids song and they were going to church and learning these things, and Jesus is part of that process. And he says, you know the answer to this. We've been learning this since we were 6. Hear, O Israel. There's nothing complicated here. The complication is not in grasping the words. The complication is in submitting to the message. Hear, O Israel. Yahweh is our God. Yahweh is one. And one's a little hard for me. I like one. I like the elders' theme of one. One is, well, it's significant. Nowadays, I don't know how we get by. A lot of times when you buy a vehicle, you get one set of keys. It's always amazing to me. I mean, only one set of keys? I need a backup. I need a spare because I'm going to lose one set of keys. And the reality is, the one car that we had that had one set of keys, we never lost them because there was only one set of keys. You didn't dare lose them. There's only one. It focuses. It restricts. Only one key will give me access to that engine, to starting that car, to being mobile and transporting. The Lord our God is one. There's only one. There aren't any others. There are no other gods. He's not a God among many. By the way, that's what he says a lot of times. The Lord is God alone. And alone may be a possible translation here. It's one of those weird, vague phrases that makes us study a lot. Yahweh is one. He's not talking about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I don't think the triad aspect of God, the Trinity being one God, that's true. I don't think that's really where he's going in the Shema. Yahweh is one. He's number one. He's number one. Well, he is number one. And I love the song. Lord, the people praise you, lift you up, and raise you. You're the one, the only one. You're the one. The one. Well, look at this passage in Deuteronomy chapter 4. I'm going to read a little more context around it. The main text will come up there on your screen. I'm going to read it if my Bible will separate for me. Indeed now, verse 32, chapter 4. Concerning the former days which you were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and inquire from one end of the heavens to the other, has anything been done like this great thing? Or has anything been heard like this? Has any people heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire as you have heard it and survived? Or has God tried to go to take for himself a nation from within another nation by trials, by signs and wonders, and by war, and by mighty hand, and by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, as Yahweh your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it has been shown that you might know that Yahweh, he is God, there is no other besides him. Out of the heavens, he let you hear his voice to discipline you. And on earth, he let you see his great fire. And you heard his words from the midst of the fire. Because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them. And he personally brought you from Egypt by his great power, driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in and to give you their land for an inheritance as it is today. Know therefore today, and take it to your heart, that Yahweh, he is God in heaven above, and on earth below, there is no other. Yahweh is God in heaven and on earth, and there is no other. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, Yahweh, is our God. Yahweh is one. There is no other besides him. When the elders start to think about one kingdom, we understand that it's underneath one God, one heart. One God has placed one heart within us, one faith. We place our faith in the one and only existing one, the I Am, the one who is God. Yahweh exists. We believe in him. And when Jesus was a boy, he learned to say that. But when Jesus was a boy, he also remembered an encounter that happened with the prophet Elijah. Do you remember this encounter in 1 Kings chapter 18? Elijah had prayed that it might not rain, and it did not rain on the earth for 3 years to that point. And can you imagine if it had not rained at all, period? And Mike had said, it's not going to rain. And we said, yeah, sure, Mike. And 3 years later, it hadn't rained. We're going to all be hunting Mike, right? We're going to know where Mike is. And Mike says, it's not going to rain until I tell it to rain again. And we're going to be hunting as fast and as hard as we can because it's getting desperate. We need some rain. There was a god in the land of Canaan who was known for his thunder and lightning. They called him Baal. And the Israelites, after they moved into the land, they forgot the Shema. Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone, the only God. And they started worshiping Baal. And as they started worshiping Baal, God pretty well just comes along. Elijah has this word and says, God, don't let it rain. Let's just see if their rain god can show up. Which, by the way, goes all the way back to the 10 plagues in Egypt. When God goes into Egypt to take the Israelites out to show them that Yahweh is God, God alone, he attacks all the deities of Egypt. The sun god, he makes it dark. All the insects, he wipes them out. The frogs, they worship the Nile. Everything they worshiped in Egypt, that's the 10 plagues. And God says, by my mighty right arm, I'm going to show you that I am God alone. None of those other things that you call gods are. They have no power. I alone have power. So God shows up and brings his people out. The Shema tells them to remember that, but within a couple of generations, they've forgotten that. And Elisha says, what are you doing here? Look at the text, 1 Kings 8:21. Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him a word. Silence. Oh, he's gathered those 450 prophets of Baal, the 400 prophets of the Asherah. They're all up on top of Mount Carmel. All of the people are there. He's called Israel together. He's got Ahab the king on task. Elijah, the one who says, don't let it rain, is going to show up. And Elijah shows up and all the people are there. And he says, how long are you going to try to decide whether God is God or not? How long are you going to take to decide whether God is God or not? Have you decided yet this morning whether God is God? Whether there's only one God? Whether he's common and all the people around the world with deities have common deities, and our God is one of them. Maybe our God's even the best one of them, but he's just one of them. We'd hate to tell everybody else that their gods weren't any good. What does it say if we say that there is only one God? The exclusivity of Yahweh is God alone. Yahweh is one. How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If God is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him. Everybody goes scratching their heads. Pretty good idea. I wonder if we can tell which one has power. Elijah says, I'll tell you what, dude. You got 450 prophets there. Have them give us a couple of bulls. Get all ready to make a sacrifice. And get everything prepared. Don't put any fire under it. And give me a bull. And I'll get the altar all ready. And I'll put the meat on the altar. And I won't put any fire under it. And whichever God shows up, he'll be God. Great idea. I wonder how the prophets of Baal felt right then, but all the people said, great idea. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful way for us to decide. What we really need is a clear sign, an indication that Yahweh is God. Which was sad because he'd been God all along, but they'd forgotten it. Sort of like our nation maybe, right? Where God's been God all along and we're on the verge of forgetting it. That's all right. If the nation forgets it, you'll remember it, right? Because you're in the kingdom and not in the nation. There is one kingdom. And there were Israelites everywhere saying, that's a great idea. So they get all that stuff done, and they start about noontime, and all the 450 prophets of Baal are dancing and jumping and praying. And then they had this part of their religious ritual. They were cutting themselves with swords and lancets and knives and blood everywhere. And I mean, they're just rejoicing before their God. Come on, Baal, show up. Elijah, y'all might ought to yell a little louder. Jump a little higher. Scream a little more. I think your God's asleep. I don't think he's listening to you. I don't think Baal's going to show up. Waits all afternoon long. Now it's time for the evening sacrifice. Elijah finally, I guess he wakes up from a nap. That's what I would be doing by that point. Okay, Ahab, y'all gather around. Get everybody together. It's time. It's time. It's time. He'd been out with his spade. He'd been digging around his sacrifice. It would hold a good 6 or 7 gallons of water in the ditch around it. Doesn't sound like much, does it? 3 years of drought, water was powerful. You're going to take 10 pitchers of water and pour them on your sacrifice. At least keep the water in case God doesn't show up, we'll have a drink. No, I'm pouring water. 10 pitchers of water at the end of a 3-year drought. I'm drowning my sacrifice. I am just flooding it down. Marlene and I, we had a bunch of fires this week. You know we like to burn in our stove. Pat and I had been cutting a little wood. I cut some green pecan. It was laying out in the rain, 1/2 inch of ice on it. I thought, I wonder if that'll burn. We got a really good hot stove, so I go out and I get an ice-coated limb of pecan and throw it right in the middle of my fire. It hisses and it spits and it spews. But as I told you, I've got a stove, not a fireplace. My stove was sitting at 450 degrees, and it didn't take it very long to melt the ice, to dry up the water, to dry the wood, and consume it. It burned. It was a good fire. It was a good time. I think Elijah had a better time. Elijah got his water on his meat, on his stones, around the ditch. Let it be known that Yahweh, he is God. Boom. The rocks are gone. Not the frozen wood. The rocks are gone. The ditch is gone. There's a hole in the ground where the sacrifice was. God shows up. All the people say, Yahweh, he is God. Now, I wish that I could tell you that they didn't forget that again and they lived that way forever, but they were like a lot of us. We test God every now and then, and we wonder if God's really God, or if he's just a good God, or if he's just going to show up occasionally. And God says, quit playing games with me. I am one. I am the only God. There is no one beside me. I'm the only God that exists. Serve me. Love me. So the next verse reminds us in the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. There's only one God, and he's the one we love. He's the one that we submit to. He's the one that we give to with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our might. That's all of our thinking, all of our feeling, animation, all of our strength, our capacity. We love God completely with all that we are. He's only one God and we're only one person, so we'll love all of God with all we are. That's what God longs for. And that's how we come to be one with God. One. One kingdom. God invites you to believe that one faith this morning. To believe that he alone is God. To declare that faith before this audience. To submit to the washing away in the waters of the baptism. All of your old allegiances, all of your old sins, all of your old problems, he wants to eliminate those from you and have you raised to walk in newness of life as one heart following one God into one kingdom. The Lord added to their number, that's the kingdom. Day by day, those that are being saved. You don't get to decide who's in the church. Only God gets to decide that. The one God gets to determine who has submitted to him and come into his kingdom. One God. You only get to determine whether you will be that one person that will submit fully to one God and come into one kingdom. Here's your take home this morning. I think it's time for take home. Yahweh is the only God. Don't try to use his name as some sort of magic form, magic term. Don't try to use his name to take it in vain, but I wanted you to have a designation so you would understand it's not some ambiguous Lord, someone who claims power and authority, and if somebody comes along and has more power, then he won't be Lord anymore. No, Yahweh is the only God, our God alone. We're going to submit to him, and we're going to follow him completely with all of our heart. What's our song, Byron?
Only a holy God.
Only a holy God. How appropriate. If you would submit to the only one, the holy God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. The Lord is our God. What a powerful, powerful word. Jesus learned it. Jesus prayed it. Jesus lived it. Jesus lives it. He is one. Would you confess that as together we stand and sing?